Before we start, be careful. This story is not for little kids. This is just for learning and fun. This is exactly what happened in a real courtroom during Sean Diddy Combs' trial, as told by Inner City Press. If you like this kind of court news, please hit the like button and follow our channel for more breaking news from courtrooms. What makes a man who seemed so powerful suddenly fall down in court? What did one of Hollywood's most famous actors say that shocked a music star so much that doctors had to help him? And why did Sean Diddy Combs, who had stayed calm through weeks of bad news about him, suddenly break down when George Clooney came to speak? In a New York City courtroom where Sean Diddy Combs was facing serious criminal charges, a surprise witness made everything change. George Clooney, the movie star who won an Oscar and is known for helping people and talking about politics, said things so shocking that it made the defendant very upset. As Clooney calmly told stories about what he saw at Diddy's famous all-white parties in the Hamptons, the music mogul went from looking confident to looking scared in just a few minutes. The courtroom became totally quiet as Clooney talked about specific things he saw: hidden cameras, people being forced to do things, and a smart plan to get embarrassing videos of party guests. When the actor showed personal records he had kept after becoming suspicious of why Diddy invited certain guests, even the lawyers trying to put Diddy in jail looked surprised by this extra proof. Diddy, who had been taking notes and sometimes whispering to his lawyers, suddenly stopped writing in the middle of a sentence. People watching said his face turned white when Clooney mentioned a specific date and place. The defense team quickly asked for a short break, but before Judge Alyssa Saunders could say yes, Diddy slumped forward, his forehead hitting the table with a loud thud. "We need medical help," called his lawyer as security guards rushed to help him. The courtroom was quickly emptied as paramedics helped Diddy, who seemed to be having a really bad panic attack, or maybe heart problems. This isn't just another celebrity talking against someone they used to know. This is about what happens when someone who has nothing to gain and everything to lose decides that telling the truth matters more than Hollywood friendships or staying comfortable. This is about what George Clooney saw, what he wrote down, and why his words might have just changed the whole direction of one of the biggest criminal cases in recent memory. Before we start, be careful. This story is not for little kids. This is just for learning and fun. This is exactly what happened in a real courtroom during Sean Diddy Combs' trial, as told by Inner City Press. Nobody expected George Clooney to be on the witness list. The room was tense. Eyes looked at the courtroom entrance until the security guard announced the next witness. People gasped. Even the judge seemed shocked for a moment. No announcement had been leaked to the reporters. No prepared statement had gotten the audience ready, just George Clooney walking confidently to the witness stand, his grey hair and nice navy suit showing he understood how important this moment was. Until that moment, Diddy had kept his usual cool attitude throughout the court case, but something had changed. Maybe it was the way Clooney nodded briefly toward Diddy, a gesture without any of the Hollywood warmth they'd once shared. Maybe it was the leather notebook Clooney carried instead of prepared notes. Maybe it was the whispers that immediately went through the courtroom. Whatever it was, Diddy was done pretending to be a man who was just bothered by pushy prosecutors. George Clooney wasn't speaking as a celebrity or industry friend. He was there as a witness who had written down troubling patterns over years of social get-togethers, who'd kept careful records when his gut told him something was very wrong with the exclusive parties he was going to. And when he began to speak, the courtroom wasn't ready for the step-by-step, detailed story he would tell. Because what George Clooney revealed about the real purpose of Diddy's white parties, the specific ways they spied on people, and what it meant for guests wasn't just disturbing, it was damaging because it was so precise and believable. The Manhattan Federal Courthouse had seen its share of famous witnesses, but the feeling in the room changed noticeably as Clooney was sworn in. Prosecutor Jessica Roberts approached her questions with careful preparation, knowing that this testimony represented a view no one had expected. "Mr. Clooney, can you please explain your relationship with the defendant?" Roberts began. Professional acquaintances, Clooney replied, his voice steady and calm. We've been to the same industry events over the years, including several of Mr. Combs' white parties in the Hamptons between 2006 and 2019. And what made you come forward as a witness in this case? Clooney leaned slightly forward. When I read the accusations and specific details in the charges, I recognized patterns I had written down myself because I was worried about others in the industry. I realized I had information that supported key parts of the prosecution's case. The defense lawyer stood up immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Clooney's personal opinions about the case don't matter. I'm not giving opinions, Clooney responded before the judge could rule. I'm here to tell about specific things I saw and wrote down. Judge Saunders nodded. Objection denied. The witness may continue. Diddy shifted in his seat, his usual mask of casual confidence slipping as Clooney opened the journal he'd brought with him. For the first time since the trial began, the music mogul looked genuinely worried. Mr. Clooney, continued Prosecutor Roberts, could you tell us about your first concerns about the defendant's white parties? As Clooney began his answer, the room fell into a silence so complete you could hear the soft sound of the courtroom's air conditioning system. What came next would change everything. It started like any other day of the trial. The room buzzed with quiet conversations. The reporters hunched in their special rows, and lawyers whispered strategies as they waited for Judge Saunders to call the next witness. But when the security guard announced the United States calls George Clooney to the stand, the room changed. You could hear a pin drop. Some people thought it was a mistake. Others thought it was a different George Clooney. But the way the Hollywood icon walked confidently through the courtroom doors, making eye contact with no one, told everyone this was real. The judge raised an eyebrow, and Diddy, who had been looking at documents with his lawyer, suddenly froze, his pen hovering above the paper. George Clooney moved purposefully to the witness stand, his hand raised to take the oath. No eye contact with anyone. He didn't even look at Diddy. Please state your full name for the record, the clerk asked. George Timothy Clooney, he replied, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. The judge allowed the proceedings to continue, and from that moment on, the entire trial shifted, because what Clooney was about to say wasn't part of any media story. It wasn't a social media leak. It was something that had stayed hidden for years. The story of how we got here began almost 20 years ago, when Diddy's white parties in the Hamptons had become legendary in entertainment circles. At first covered by society pages as exclusive celebrity gatherings, the events had taken on an almost mythical status. Fun. Getting invited to a Diddy white party meant you had made it to the top level of entertainment royalty. George Clooney, already a famous A-list actor by the early 2000s, had been to several of these events over the years. His testimony today would reveal that his presence at these parties had changed from casual attendance to deliberate watching. I first went to one of Mr. Combs' white parties in 2006, Clooney testified, looking occasionally at his journal. It was what you'd expect, fancy, exclusive, carefully chosen guest lists. But something felt wrong about the way certain guests, particularly younger women and men new to the industry, were being treated. Clooney described how, as a veteran in the entertainment industry, he had developed a sensitivity to power dynamics and taking advantage of people. There's a big difference between networking and grooming, he said firmly, between being hospitable and controlling. He testified that by his third white party in 2011, he had begun taking notes. I noticed patterns, specific staff members who would guide certain guests to private areas, particular drinks being served to some but not others, and an unusual number of what appeared to be security personnel, but who weren't doing typical security work. Prosecutor Roberts guided Clooney through his observations step by step. Did you witness anything that specifically concerned you enough to write it down? Yes, Clooney replied, turning a page in his journal. At the 2014 white party, I accidentally entered the wrong room looking for a bathroom. Inside was what appeared to be a monitoring station, multiple screens showing various areas of the property, including bedrooms and bathrooms. 2 men were watching and occasionally adjusting what looked like remote cameras. They quickly escorted me out. claiming it was private security protocols. That's when I started being much more systematic in my observations. The courtroom was completely silent. As Clooney continued, he described creating a detailed map of camera locations he had identified throughout the property, noting which areas were being watched. He wrote down conversations he overheard between staff members about collecting on specific guests and making sure everything is captured. By 2018, I had confirmed my suspicions that these weren't just parties. They were elaborate operations designed to gather embarrassing material on attendees, Clooney stated. I began warning close friends to decline invitations, but I continued attending myself to document what was happening. Defense Attorney Morrison stood quickly. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Clooney is guessing about motives and intentions he couldn't possibly know. I'm not guessing, Clooney countered calmly. On August 12, 2019, I directly overheard Mr. Combembes instructing his head of security, and I quote from my notes taken that same night, "Make sure we get everything on Williams tonight. I need enough to ensure his cooperation on the Vegas deal." Judge Sanders overruled the objection and Prosecutor Roberts continued. Mr. Clooney, did you ever witness Mr. Combembes using this alleged material to influence others? Yes, Clooney replied, his expression serious. At an industry event in early 2020, I observed Mr. Combamb's music executive aside. The executive had recently declined to work with Bad Boy Records on a major project. Mr. Combes showed him something on his phone, and I distinctly heard him say, "Would hate for your wife to see this from the Hampton weekend." Within a week, the partnership was announced. As Clooney's testimony continued, Diddy's composed facade began to crack. He whispered urgently to his lawyers, his gestures becoming increasingly agitated. When Clooney mentioned specific dates and names that had not been part of the public record, Diddy's anxiety became visibly pronounced. The carefully documented journal was about to reveal secrets that had remained hidden behind the glamorous facade of white linen and champagne for nearly 2 decades. "I've kept this information private for a long time," Clooney continued, his manner serious but composed. "I've built my career on being discreet and professional. I've maintained relationships across this industry regardless of personal differences, but none of that justifies staying silent when I have direct knowledge of criminal behavior." Prosecutor Roberts approached with a document. Your Honor, we'd like to Mr. Clooney's personal records as Exhibit 142. The defense team immediately objected, demanding time to review the unexpected evidence. After a brief sidebar, Judge Saunders allowed the journal to be entered into evidence but granted the defense team a 15-minute recess to examine the material before cross-examination could begin. As the jurors were escorted out, Diddy huddled with his legal team, his usual confident manner replaced by obvious concern. His lawyers flipped frantically through photocopies of Clooney's journal, highlighting sections and whispering urgently. When court resumed, Clooney's testimony grew even more specific and damaging. The surveillance system at the white parties evolved over time, he explained. In the earlier years 2006 to 2010, it was relatively primitive, strategically placed cameras in bedrooms, bathrooms and private areas. By 2015, it had become sophisticated enough that guests were essentially under continuous monitoring from the moment they arrived. "How do you know this?" Roberts asked. "Because in 2016, I deliberately brought counter-surveillance equipment with me," Clooney replied. A friend in the security industry provided a device that could detect wireless cameras and recording equipment. I mapped the entire property and documented the locations. He pointed to detailed diagrams in his journal showing the Hamptons estate layout with dozens of surveillance points marked. "Mr. Clooney," Roberts continued, "did you ever confront the defendant about what you had discovered?" "Yes, indirectly," Clooney said. "At a 2018 party, I made a point of mentioning to him that the bathroom in the East Wing seemed to have a technical issue with the light fixture. I was very specific about the location of a camera I had detected. Within 30 minutes, a maintenance person had replaced that fixture. Mr. Combembes watched me carefully for the remainder of the event. and my invitation to the 2019 party arrived with a handwritten note saying, "For observation only." The courtroom stirred at this revelation. Diddy, who had been taking notes, suddenly stopped writing. "Did you interpret that note as a threat?" Roberts asked. Clooney then described the most disturbing aspect of his documentation, a pattern of guests being guided to specific rooms after being served particular drinks, often by the same staff members. "I began tracking which guests were approached, which rooms they were taken to, and how they appeared when they re-emerged," he testified. There was a clear pattern of targeting, usually younger people new to the industry, often those in vulnerable positions professionally or financially. He then revealed what would prove to be the most damaging testimony. "In 2019, I deliberately positioned myself to observe one of these interactions fully. A young actress, whose name I provided to prosecutors but won't mention here, was guided to the third-floor East Suite. She appeared already intoxicated. I created a diversion by spilling a drink near the staircase, which drew the attending staff member away. I then checked on the young woman and found her barely conscious." Clooney's voice remained steady, but his expression hardened. "When I helped her out of the room, she mumbled that she couldn't remember how many drinks she'd had. I got her safely to a friend's house, and the next day she had no recollection of the latter part of the evening. That's when I contacted a trusted friend at the FBI." The defense lawyer stood immediately. "Objection. This is hearsay and prejudicial speculation." "Overruled," Judge Saunders replied firmly. "The witness is recounting his direct observations." Diddy's face had lost all colour. He reached for his water glass, but his hand trembled so visibly that he set it down without drinking. Roberts continued, "Mr. Clooney, you mentioned providing this information to the FBI." "In early 2020, Clooney replied. "I met with agents at my home in Los Angeles and provided copies of my documentation. I was told an investigation was already underway. And why are you coming forward publicly now?" "Because I received a subpoena," Clooney said simply. "And because remaining silent at this point would make me complicit." The most damaging moment came when Roberts asked about specific conversations Clooney had documented. "On July 2nd, 2019, I overheard Mr. Combermere speaking to his head of security on the property's East Terrace." My journal entry from that night records him saying, and I quote, "The system is working perfectly. We've got enough on Jensen to ensure the contract goes our way, and the footage from the Williamson girl should keep her management in line on the tour negotiations." As Clooney read directly from his journal, Diddy's breathing became visibly laboured. His lawyer pushed a notepad toward him, but he seemed unable to focus on it. "Mr. Clooney," Roberts asked, "based on your observations, what do you believe was the primary purpose of these white parties?" Defence counsel nearly leaped to their feet. "Objection calls for speculation." "I'll rephrase," Roberts said smoothly. "Mr. Clooney, did Mr. Combes ever directly state to you the purpose of the surveillance systems at these events?" "Yes," Clooney replied. "At the 2017 party, after several drinks, he put his arm around my shoulder and said, 'George, you know what makes a man powerful in this town? Not money, information. I've got something on everyone who matters.' When I asked him what he meant, he laughed and said, 'Why do you think I host these parties? White isn't just the dress code. It's about having a clean slate afterward, with everybody owing me.'" At this recitation, Diddy suddenly lurched forward in his chair, his face contorted, and he clutched at his chest. His lawyer called out an alarm as Diddy slumped forward, his forehead hitting the table before his security team could catch him. Judge Saunders immediately called for medical assistance. "Court is in recess. Clear the courtroom." As paramedics rushed in, Clooney remained composed on the witness stand, watching with concern but no surprise, as if he had long anticipated this day would come. The trial resumed the following morning with Diddy present but noticeably subdued. Medical personnel had determined he had experienced a panic attack rather than a cardiac event, and after evaluation at a nearby hospital, he had been cleared to return to court. But the confident music mogul of previous days was gone. replaced by a man who appeared shaken and diminished. George Clooney returned to the witness stand to continue his testimony, which now focused on establishing the pattern of control Diddy had allegedly maintained through his surveillance operation. With methodical precision, Clooney outlined what he called a three-phase system that he had documented over years of observation. The first phase was collection, Clooney explained, referring to his notes. Guests would be surveilled throughout the events, with particular attention paid to capturing compromising situations, often ones that had been deliberately orchestrated through targeted drinks or suggestions from staff. Prosecutor Roberts displayed a diagram from Clooney's journal showing the Hamptons estate layout with specific zones marked for different types of surveillance. The second phase was categorization, Clooney continued. On multiple occasions, I observed Mr. Cumben as meeting with a small team the day after events in what they called review sessions. They would go through footage and files, organizing them according to potential leverage value. How do you know this? Roberts asked. In 2018, I deliberately arrived a day early for the White Party, claiming travel schedule conflicts. I was given access to the guest house, which shared a partial wall with Mr. Combs' media room. I could clearly hear these sessions through the ventilation system. Damn. Clooney described how he had documented specific conversations, including references to primary targets and long-term investments, terms used to categorize guests based on their current or potential future value to Diddy's business interests. The third phase was application, Clooney said gravely. I witnessed or became aware of multiple instances where this collected material was used to influence business decisions, secure favorable contracts, or silence potential critics. He detailed specific instances he had documented. A record label executive who suddenly changed position on a distribution deal after a private meeting with Diddy. An artist who abandoned a lawsuit over royalties following an unexplained meeting. A journalist who killed a negative story after receiving what staff referred to as a reminder package. The defense team fought vigorously to discredit Clooney's testimony, suggesting his observations were limited and his interpretations speculative. But Clooney's detailed documentation, coupled with his reputation for integrity, made him a formidable witness. During cross-examination, defense attorney Patricia Morrison attempted to portray Clooney as having a personal vendetta against Diddy. Clooney, isn't it true that you and Mr. Combaz had a disagreement over a charitable initiative in 2015? Morrison asked. We had different approaches to the project, Clooney acknowledged calmly. But I've worked with many people with whom I've had professional disagreements. That wouldn't motivate me to document criminal behavior if none existed. Yet you took it upon yourself to essentially spy on Mr. Combes for years, Morrison pressed. That seems extraordinarily invasive for a mere professional disagreement. Clooney leaned forward slightly. I began documenting what I observed because I was concerned about people being victimized. When you witness predatory behavior and say nothing, you become part of the problem. The most damaging testimony came when Clooney described how the operation extended beyond the white parties themselves. The parties were just the collection phase, he explained. The system extended much further. I documented at least 3 instances where individuals who had attended white parties later reported break-ins at their homes where nothing of value was taken. However, personal computers and phones had been accessed. He described how he had connected these incidents through conversations at industry events, where multiple people shared similar stories. After recognizing the pattern, I began keeping track of these reports and found they consistently involved people who had recently refused requests from Mr. Combes or his business entities. Prosecutor Roberts displayed a timeline Clooney had created showing the correlation between these reported incidents and business negotiations with Diddy's companies. This wasn't random. Clooney testified. Multiple times he would instruct me to send a reminder to specific individuals who were resisting his business proposals. This meant preparing a package containing screenshots or short clips from the surveillance footage, along with a handwritten note that simply said, "Looking forward to resolving our differences." Defense attorney Morrison objected strenuously. arguing that Chen's testimony involved privileged communications between an assistant and her employer. After a lengthy sidebar, Judge Saunders allowed the testimony to continue, citing the crime-fraud exception to privilege. The breaking point for Diddy came when Chen described a specific incident involving a young artist who had threatened to speak publicly about inappropriate behavior at one of the white parties. Mr. Key called me into his office and showed me footage of this artist in a compromising situation at the previous year's party. Chen testified. He instructed me to arrange a private meeting and to bring the footage. After that meeting, the artist signed a new contract with an extensive non-disclosure agreement and never spoke about the party again. Did Mr. Combebs ever explicitly acknowledge that he was using this material to coerce people? Roberts asked. Yes, Chen said, her voice unwavering. After that particular meeting, he told me, that's how you handle problems in this business. Everyone has secrets, and secrets are currency. At this statement, Diddy's carefully maintained facade finally collapsed completely. He pushed back from the defense table abruptly, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. His lawyers tried to calm him, but he shook them off, his face contorted with anger and panic. This is a setup, he shouted, gesturing wildly toward Chen. She's lying. They're all lying. Judge Saunders immediately called for order. Mr. Combs, control yourself or you will be removed from this courtroom. Diddy seemed beyond reason, continuing to shout accusations about a conspiracy against him. The judge ordered the jury to be escorted out as bailiffs moved toward the defense table. In a final dramatic moment before being restrained, Diddy turned toward George Clooney, who had remained in the courtroom to observe Chen's testimony. You did this, he shouted, his voice breaking with emotion. Sorry, Stumteasant. You were supposed to be part of the circle. You betrayed everything. As Diddy was escorted from the courtroom, those words hung in the air, an unintended confession that seemed to confirm everything the prosecution had been working to prove. The following day marked the climactic confrontation of the trial. After Diddy's outburst, Judge Saunders had ordered a psychiatric evaluation and had warned that any further disruptions would result in him being barred from the courtroom for the remainder of the proceedings. Now, a visibly subdued Diddy sat at the defense table, his legal team having been reinforced overnight with additional lawyers specializing in damage control. The prosecution called their final witness, Jason Martinez, former head of security for Diddy's Hamptons estate from 2015 to 2020, who had been granted limited immunity in exchange for his testimony. As Martinez took the stand, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Diddy stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, clearly under strict instructions from his legal team to maintain his composure regardless of what was said. Mr. Martinez, Prosecutor Roberts began, please describe your duties as head of security for Mr. Combemba's Hamptons estate. I managed physical security for the property, guest screening and surveillance operations, Martinez replied, his voice professional and detached. Could you elaborate on surveillance operations? Martinez detailed an extensive system that aligned precisely with what Clooney had documented in his journal. A network of hidden cameras throughout the property, particularly in private areas where guests might engage in compromising behavior. What was the purpose of this surveillance system? Roberts asked. Initially, Mr. Combebs described it as security to protect high-profile guests, Martinez explained. But over time, the focus shifted. By 2017, my team was given specific targets at each event. Guests Mr. Combebs wanted particular footage of. And what happened to this footage? It was reviewed, edited, and archived according to potential value, Martinez stated. Mr. Combebs called it relationship insurance. As Martinez's testimony continued, he confirmed the existence of what Chen had called the leverage file and described specific instances where Diddy had used this material to influence business deals, silence critics, or pressure individuals into agreements unfavorable to them. The climactic moment came when Roberts displayed evidence recovered during the FBI raid on Diddy's properties, a sophisticated digital archive containing compromising material on dozens of entertainment industry figures, organized exactly as Clooney and Chen had described. Mr. Martinez, is this the system you helped maintain? Roberts asked, displaying screenshots of the archive's organization. Yes, Martinez confirmed. This was the primary archive. Access was restricted to Mr. Cumbay and 3 trusted associates. Defense attorney Morrison began an aggressive cross-examination, suggesting that Martinez was testifying to save himself from more serious charges. Isn't it true that you personally operated the surveillance system without Mr. Combs' full knowledge of its extent? No, Martinez replied firmly. Mr. Combs directed every aspect of the operation. He personally reviewed footage after each event and made decisions about how it would be used. Morrison pressed harder. And yet you're the one with technical expertise. You could have expanded this system without his knowledge, couldn't you? The system was expanded twice, Martinez countered, both times at Mr. Combs' explicit direction, and with additional funding he personally approved. I have the equipment orders with his signatures. As the cross-examination continued, Martinez remained unshaken, providing specific dates, conversations, and details that aligned with both Clooney's journal and Chen's testimony. The defense's attempts to create inconsistencies failed repeatedly. The final dramatic confrontation came when Morrison, growing increasingly frustrated, asked, "Isn't it convenient that your testimony aligns so perfectly with Mr. Clooney's journal? Did prosecutors coach you using his notes?" Martinez looked directly at Morrison. "I've never seen Mr. Clooney's journal, but I'm not surprised our accounts align because we were describing the same reality. The difference is that he was documenting it from the outside as a concerned witness, while I was following orders from the inside as an employee." He then turned to look directly at Diddy. Mr. Combs knew exactly what he was doing. He called it his power system, the collection and strategic use of compromising material to control people who could affect his business interests or public image. At this direct accusation, Diddy finally broke his silence. "That's a damn lie," he said, his voice low but intense. Martinez didn't flinch. "Sir, I was in the room when you told a new security team member, and I quote, 'The real product at these parties isn't the music or the networking, it's the leverage we collect.' That was July 14th, 2019. I wrote it down because it clarified what we were really doing there." As Martinez delivered this final damning testimony, the jury's attention moved between him and Diddy, watching for the reaction that might confirm or deny this account. What they saw was a man whose empire of control was crumbling before his eyes. In the days following Martinez's testimony, the trial moved into closing arguments. The prosecution presented a comprehensive narrative that wove together the testimonies of Clooney, Chen, Martinez, and other witnesses into a damning portrait of a sophisticated criminal enterprise designed to gather compromising material and weaponize it for business advantage and personal control. Defense attorney Patricia Morrison fought valiantly to create reasonable doubt, arguing that while surveillance might have occurred, there was insufficient evidence that Diddy had personally directed its misuse. Overzealous employees exceeded their authority, she argued. Mr. Combs was focused on his legitimate business interests while others abused his trust. But the weight of testimony, coupled with the electronic evidence recovered in the FBI raids, had created a mountain of evidence that proved difficult to dismiss. After just 14 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on multiple counts of extortion, conspiracy, and witness tampering. As the verdicts were read, Diddy stood motionless, his expression unreadable. When the final count was announced, he turned briefly toward the gallery where George Clooney sat with other witnesses who had testified. Their eyes met for a brief moment before Diddy was led away by U.S. Marshals, his $10 million bail revoked pending sentencing. Outside the courthouse, the impact of the verdict reverberated through the entertainment industry with seismic force. Major record labels and entertainment companies scrambled to distance themselves from any association with Diddy's businesses. Streaming platforms removed his music from curated playlists. Former business partners issued carefully worded statements expressing shock and claiming ignorance of his methods. George Clooney, who had remained largely silent outside the courtroom throughout the trial, finally addressed the media at a brief press conference 2 days after the verdict. This case was never about one individual's downfall, Clooney stated, flanked by his wife Amal, a human rights lawyer. So, it was about exposing a system that allowed powerful people to prey on the vulnerable and use intimidation to maintain control. The entertainment industry needs to take a hard look at the power structures that enabled this behavior to continue for so long.